Hello, college sports superfans. You're listening to the College Sports Superfan. I'm reacting to the college football playoffs right now. This is my instant reactions. I just saw that the rankings got revealed. I missed the reveal show. I was out running some errands, but I'm back seeing the rankings for the first time now. And this is my instant reaction to it and what it means for the end of the regular season. So, let's take a look at it. Oregon, the number one overall seed. I had some belief that Oregon might drop because of their close win to Wisconsin. Me personally, if I was to do the rankings, I would have actually moved Texas up to number one and put Oregon at number two and Ohio State at number three. Because again, can't move Ohio State past Oregon because Oregon has the head to head victory. But in these rankings, Oregon stays at number one, Ohio State stays at number two, Texas stays at number three, Penn State stays at number four, Indiana stays at number five. Now, what does this mean in terms of the actual bracket? Well, Oregon would be the number one seed in the bracket, but Texas would be the number two seed because keep in mind Ohio State, Penn State, and Indiana are all in the Big Ten Conference. Therefore, they can't get the first round bye, assuming that Oregon ends up winning the conference championship, which will likely be against the winner of Ohio State versus Indiana. Assuming Oregon beats Washington, which they really should, although I believe that they just came out and said that Oregon is going to be in the conference championship game in Indianapolis no matter what happens against the Huskies. However, let's just say Oregon's going to beat Washington. I feel very confident about that. They'll be 12-0 heading into that championship game. Comes down to Ohio State versus Indiana. And again, there's a and to me, at this point, Ohio State, sorry not to get ahead of myself, but if Ohio State was going to end up out of the playoff, the only way I see that happening is if they lose to both Indiana and Michigan. If they lose to Indiana, but they beat Michigan, then they'll still get into the playoff with an 11-1 record. If they lose to their arch rival for the fourth straight year, then they're going to end up out of the playoff. Penn State very comfortably in, which to me is really annoying because the Nittany Lions had a very relatively easy schedule outside of playing Ohio State this season. They didn't have to play Oregon. They didn't have to play Indiana, who they typically played in the past because they were in the same division, in the East Division, in the Big Ten. They got to avoid playing the Hoosiers. The only tough game besides Ohio State was the road game against USC, which I predicted Penn State to lose, but they managed to just barely win. And the rest of their opponents are super easy. So it's very annoying looking at it going, hey, the only great team that they played, they've lost to, and yet they're basically automatically in. They are a super talented team, but that is just kind of an annoyance from me. Okay, let's talk about the actual rest of the top 12 here. You have Notre Dame at number 6, Alabama at number 7, Miami at number 8, Ole Miss at number 9, Georgia at number 10, Tennessee, the team who's getting screwed here massively, number 11, and Boise State at number 12. As you'll hear from those rankings, that means that the Big 12 conference does not have a team that's in the top 12. BYU is at number 14. Colorado is at number 16. So this is looking very similar to the AP poll. Why is that important? Well, that means that Boise State would technically be the fourth highest ranked conference champion, assuming they win out and still win the Mountain West, which I personally feel very, very strongly about. The one game that I thought they could lose at the end of their schedule was to San Jose State. Next, they're going to play Wyoming, which should be an easy, easy win. And then the only tough opponent I think that they'll have the rest of the way would be in the Mountain West Conference Championship game, which could be against Colorado State, which, yes, the Rams got beat down by Texas this year, but Colorado State does have a really explosive offense, and there is the possibility that CSU could beat Boise State. But ultimately, I think I'd feel pretty good about Boise beating Colorado State as well. And then their only loss this season would be to number one ranked Oregon on the road, which they only lost by 3, which is really, really, really. I mean, if there's a quality loss on your schedule, that's the quality loss. So that's helping Boise State out quite a bit. Okay, let's talk about Tennessee here. Tennessee is the team that's getting absolutely screwed. There's always a team every single year in the four-team playoff. People complain about the four-team playoff a lot because they're like, oh, look at this great team. Look at Florida State, like last year, who went undefeated. Oh, Florida State's getting screwed. They're getting left out. Georgia, they're getting screwed. They're getting left out. And you could make that argument that, yes, that's going to happen. And people thought, oh, if we just expand it to 12 teams, that's going to solve everything. Tennessee is the perfect example that it does not solve everything. Yes, they lost by 2 touchdowns to Georgia on the road at night, by the way. So, yes, of course, Tennessee should be ranked lower than Georgia. But why is Alabama ranked all the way at number 7? Yes, the Crimson Tide beat Georgia, but Alabama also lost to Tennessee and did not look very impressive against the Volunteers. And Alabama lost to Vanderbilt, who perennially is mediocre. Now, again, Tennessee lost to Arkansas, but still, Arkansas and Vanderbilt are about the same level this season. So, why is Alabama way higher than Tennessee when Tennessee is the team that beat Alabama? And yes, Alabama is looking a little bit better now, but still, that ranking is just favoritism, in my opinion. I'm just being honest about it. It's favoritism. Ole Miss, they're number 9 in the country. They've got 2 losses. They have the impressive win over Georgia. However, they lost to Kentucky. So you're looking at say, okay, well, Tennessee lost to Arkansas. That's not a great loss. But Kentucky is worse than Arkansas. Kentucky is literally a much worse team than Arkansas, yet Ole Miss is ranked higher than Tennessee. Does that make a whole lot of sense? I don't think so. Regardless, Tennessee in this current model, even though they're number 11, they would actually be the first team out of the playoff because Boise State would get in, of course, and then the Big 12 champion still would get into the playoff. They would just be the 12 seed. So it's either going to be BYU or Colorado at this moment. Of course, there's other Big 12 teams that are alive, like Arizona State, who's ranked number 21 in the country. They're 8-2. So there's other Big 12 teams that are still alive. There's another team. Is it Kansas State? There's another team I think it's Kansas State. There's another team in the Big 12 that's up in their top 4 that could make it to the conference championship, but more than likely it's going to be BYU versus Colorado. Those are the 2 teams that control their destiny. BYU's loss to Kansas certainly was a shock and certainly could kick them out. Of course, Miami would be in the first round bye because they would be ACC champions, or it could be SMU, who's number 13 in the country. They could beat Miami in the ACC championship. Me personally, that ACC title is going to be an eliminator for whoever loses. Because Miami at this point, I think they're too low. If they were like ranked higher, like Ohio State, for example, Ohio State's currently number 2 in the country. If Miami was like number 2 or number 3, if they had lost in the ACC title to SMU, that wouldn't completely drop them out of the playoff. But at number 8, I think that's just too low, just barely too low. Of course, Miami can still do some things at the end to improve on that, but Florida State is a dumpster fire. And if Miami has a close game against FSU, that's not going to be a good sign. So it's not like they can use that as a quality win. If you're a team like Tennessee, what you would need is you would hope for some chaos. Some of the things that you would hope for is for Texas to beat Texas A&M because honestly at this point with how high Texas is, I think Texas only misses the playoff if they lose to both Kentucky and Texas A&M. Those are their last 2 games. If they lose both of those games, they're out of the playoff. If they just win one of those 2, I think they're in no matter what. But whether they'd get the first round bye or not is the whole question. That will be dependent on the SEC championship game. Texas, if you're Tennessee, you need Texas to win out and beat Texas A&M or to lose out and just be out and then you take their spot. Or you need Ole Miss to lose on the road to Florida this weekend. Ole Miss also plays Mississippi State, but let's be honest, it's probably not going to be all that competitive. The more likely loss is on the road against Florida. Or you need Alabama to lose on the road against Oklahoma this upcoming Saturday, which is going to be a big game at night in Norman. If Alabama loses that game, they're out of the playoff, and I don't see any way they get back into the playoff and Tennessee takes their spot. Or you could even have Georgia lose to Georgia Tech. Now, granted, all of those are not likely, but we've seen crazy upsets happen this season already. As of right now, I'm going to give Tennessee a 50-50 chance of making it. Because again, they're going to need to win out, which they play UTEP, who's a joke. They're favored by 42 points against UTEP. And then they got to play Vanderbilt, who's a way better Vanderbilt team than we've seen the last several years. And I think Tennessee needs to beat Vanderbilt by at least 2 touchdowns. Got to beat Vanderbilt by at least 2 touchdowns, and also got to hope for some other chaos. Just one of those other three things that I mentioned: Alabama losing in an upset, Ole Miss losing in an upset, Georgia losing in an upset. If any one of those things happen, then Tennessee gets in. Oh, and they can't allow Texas A&M to beat Texas either. Because if A&M beats Texas, guess what? Then A&M is going to jump into the playoff rankings. Texas is going to fall, but still probably make it with how high their ranking is, and Tennessee would get left out that way, and possibly even another SEC team like maybe Georgia or Ole Miss would get left out too. So all of those SEC teams on the bubble also need to hope that Texas is going to get the job done in College Station at the end of the season as well. Anyways, those are just some of my instant reactions to these rankings. Ultimately, I think most of these teams that are in right now are in pretty good standing to stay in. I don't think it's going to be terribly controversial at the end, except when it comes to Tennessee. I think they're going to get screwed and get left out. But besides that, I don't think it's going to be too terribly controversial. Notre Dame is probably going to get in. They have a relatively easy end of the schedule. They have to beat Army, who's a tough team that's coming up this weekend. That's a big game. And then USC, who's dealing with all kinds of chaos. But again, if the Trojans upset Notre Dame, then that's going to be interesting in these rankings. Because let's say Notre Dame beats Army, but then loses to USC. Well, Notre Dame's going to be ranked either number 6 or they're going to move up to number 5 and stay right around there. Is that enough if you lose to USC with how mediocre they've been? Because USC is not a bad team, but they're a very mediocre team. Would that drop Notre Dame out of the top 12? Probably not, since we all know how much favoritism the Irish get as well. So, regardless, that's my instant reaction, my thoughts on the college football playoff. I think pretty much the way it's coming out now, I think we all basically know who the top teams are. It's all kind of getting set in stone. And I don't think there's going to be too much drama and too much chaos at the end. I think we're basically going to know what it is. Again, the only intrigue is just these SEC bubble teams: Georgia, Ole Miss, Tennessee. You could even throw Alabama in there as well. And if any upsets happen this weekend or even next weekend to end the regular season, they could end up eliminating themselves. And again, it's possible because, again, we've seen Ole Miss lose to Kentucky this year. Georgia really struggle more than they've have in the last 3 years. Alabama lost to Vanderbilt earlier this season. Tennessee lost to Arkansas earlier this season. So chaos can still occur in that conference. It's a very tough conference. Overall, though, I think it's pretty cut and dry, pretty straightforward. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section below. Who do you think is going to ultimately be first team or first couple of teams that's going to be left out? And who do you think, based on these rankings now, is going to win the college football playoff national championship? Let me know your predictions down in the comments below. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and share this video with others that you think might like this content as well. Thank you all so much for watching the College Sports Superfan.